So this is supposed to be an intergenerational conversation on climate, and I really want to just say this is a millennial Gen Z conversation. When I was asked to do this, I was like, intergenerational, you're making me seem like an epic auntie here.
Yes.
But just to start, so Jamie, we've known each other since 2019.
Yes.
We worked together on the climate strikes. That's how we met during all this storytelling together. So I want to have you just reflect back on 2019, the climate strikes. There's these pictures of us from back then. What were some of the highlights of that climate strike for you? And like, how did you get into doing work on climate?
I'd say the highlight of that climate strike was that felt like a very hopeful time. There were so many people in the streets. There was so much press attention to the climate crisis, and so many people seemed to be awakening. Not just that climate change is real, which is such basic rudimentary understanding, but that it is a crisis caused by humans, that it is linked to systems of oppression, of learning about environmental racism, environmental injustice. So that time in 2019 in those climate marches felt very optimistic and hopeful. Nowadays, I'm still fighting for climate justice. I was 17 at the time. Right now, I'm 20. So a lot more has happened. I feel a little less optimistic, I'd say. To let you know, to answer your question in terms of how I got started, I've been in the climate movement since I was 14 years old. I grew up in Seattle, Washington. My mom is from Colombia, and my abuela grew up living on the land as a campesina in Cundinamarca, Colombia, and so I learned a lot about taking care of the earth, valuing the earth from her, and I've always known about the climate crisis and its impending, the catastrophe that is here already. So when I was 14, I began organizing in my community in Seattle, and then a year later, I co-founded Zero Hour and have been organizing nationally and internationally ever since.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of so much having happened, give it up for Jamie. A whole pandemic has happened. We're still in a pandemic.
Yes.
Obviously, things have really shifted since 2019 when it comes to the climate crisis. We were just talking backstage about how the fossil fuel industry is still making billions in profit. So when you think about like, you know, the changes from 2019 to now, like you said that you don't feel optimistic. Can you say a little bit more about that?
I'd say the greenwashing has gotten really intense. The way that corporations have now picked up on, ooh, climate action is cool. Look at these youth climate kids. They're so trendy and hip, and I love the earth. So now we have climate influencers, and we have like climate ads, and ExxonMobil coming out with, what are you doing for the planet? Here's our ads with a bunch of fish that we're killing. And all of this stuff where COP27 is happening right now. That is the Conference of the Parties. It's a climate summit.
In Egypt.
In Egypt. Pepsi-Cola, or I think, is it Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola?
It might be both.
A large plastic polluter is the major sponsor of the climate conference, and so many fossil fuel corporations are also sponsors and participants there that it might as well just be like a fossil fuel gathering where people are like, oh, we love the climate we're destroying. It's really sad. So that level of cynicism that I've gotten now is because while we hear a lot of talk on climate, emissions are actually at a record high and still going up, and the fossil fuel industry's profits are at a record high. There are victories like people who are defending the Amazon rainforest. The indigenous organizers and people all over Brazil helped elect Lula and oust Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro was a fascist who was
Big deal.
Big deal. Bolsonaro is a fascist, anti-indigenous fascist. And so the Brazil, and especially led by the indigenous communities there, mobilized, and now the Amazon rainforest, which is the lungs of the whole planet, everyone needs the Amazon, even if you don't live there or have an association with it. The earth is better for it, and people live there. And it's the most biodiverse place in the world, so it must be protected. So that's a victory. So it's not like it's all going a certain way, but I'm very annoyed is an understatement when people are like, oh, like, let's save the earth, buy BP oil, and all of these other greenwashing things that are happening.
Yeah, so youth have definitely elevated the climate crisis to a different level. But you are critical of this whole climate influencer thing that's come around. But the climate justice movement, it is an intergenerational movement. Can you speak a little bit about the impact that youth have had? Some of what you think about this, but also like when it comes to sort of your journey, can you speak a little bit about the intergenerational mentorship you've had?
Yeah, so the whole youth climate thing, I feel like has been taken to a point where it's now there's this obsession with, oh my God, the youth activists. You see all these articles, the youth climate heroes, the youth are gonna save the world. No, we're just saying that basic science and that we don't want the world to burn, and we aren't actually the ones with the power to halt these systems. So it's very frustrating, and it also erases the voices of people who are elders, have been in this fight for a long time, of people of all ages who have degrees, who have years of work. Like youth, listening to youth on climate change means like understanding that we're inheriting this earth, and listening to the youth voices, but it's not only youth. And there has been a weird obsession, I think I'd say it's our culture's obsession with prodigy, with youth in general, and ageism, that it makes it so we don't take other voices as seriously, apparently. It's very strange. But my journey has been through mentorship. I've worked with people, like one of my mentors, Natalie Mebane, who we both know, who is an organizer, who's also a millennial, and I guess that's intergenerational, has been a huge role in the Zero Hour movement. I've learned from my elders, like my abuela, as well as other elders in the movement. My abuela's not in the climate movement, but I learned a lot about just basic caring for the earth from her. Like the people on the front lines, like those protecting the rainforest, it's elders marching alongside children, marching alongside middle-aged people. So truly, it takes all of us. It's not just a youth thing.
And what I love about your approach is also like that collaboration, like we were talking about. Like I was introduced to you through basically like your big sister in the climate movement, and we kind of have this sibling relationship. And I think that we all like play our different roles in the climate movement, and it's it's important to sort of reflect that back, that it's not just this like hip young thing. So a lot of people think that being climate conscious is about individual choices, like stop using plastic straws or not riding airplanes. You and I know that it's way more than that. Can you speak about why the climate crisis is a systemic issue?
Yeah, so the vast majority of all fossil fuel emissions are corporate. The vast majority of all ocean pollution is from mass fishing and mass corporations. The entire reason why we're in a climate crisis is because we are stuck in a system by leadership, because the government takes has billions in fossil fuel subsidies, so the government actually helps fund and protect the fossil fuel industry. So they're working in collaboration to keep us trapped within this system where we have to rely on fossil fuels. So the way that we are going to have any semblance of a non-climate disaster future, I mean, I'm not even gonna lie to y'all, it's already too late to stop climate disaster, because it's already here. People are already dying, and it's very insulting to the people who have already lost everything to be like, someday climate change is gonna happen. It's here, and it's getting worse. Emissions are going up. The fossil fuel industry is making record profits, and so I don't care about your plastic straw. I don't care if you recycle. It really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. I mean, don't be ridiculous. Don't like chuck plastic at a turtle and be like, screw you, wildlife, I hate you. Like, don't be ridiculous, but focus on elections, focus on organizing, focus on supporting the front lines. That means people stopping fossil fuels. We have to overhaul the system, and BP Oil came up with the term carbon footprint. It is a fossil fuel funded propaganda to get you focused on, oh my God, I'm polluting, I'm doing so bad for the earth. Sure, your individual consumption can add up, but they want you to focus on that kid used a straw instead of Exxon is torching the planet. So focus on the big fish.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And actually, one of the biggest conversations at the COP right now is actually about climate reparations and loss and damage. And delegations from the Pacific Islands, from Pakistan, are basically demanding that countries like the United States, that are the largest producers of emissions, most fossil fuel companies are in North America and Europe, that they pay for their fair share. And so a lot of the sort of systemic work around climate change is around holding these global north governments accountable, holding fossil fuel industry accountable, in order for us to have a just transition into a renewable energy economy across the world. So in North America and Europe, the climate movement is seen as very white. But the reality is that it's BIPOC communities and communities in the global south who are the most impacted. You're from an immigrant family, your mom's from Colombia, I'm an immigrant from Sri Lanka. This work is deeply personal to us. It is a Black and brown and indigenous issue. Can you talk about why climate is a racial justice issue, a migrant justice issue, and an equity issue?
Absolutely. So all of these issues of racism, colonialism, patriarchy, anti-immigrant sentiment, they are all essentially what formed the climate crisis. The climate crisis, if you think about it, is like the ultimate beast of all of our extraction and mistreatment over the decades, centuries. Most fossil fuel plants are built in communities of color, specifically Black and brown communities. There are literal things called sacrifice zones, is what they call them, where fossil fuel industries will sacrifice a community, which means putting large amounts of pollutants or a factory that will harm children, air quality, whatever it is, and say these people don't matter. This is a sacrifice zone. There is a place that's literally called Cancer Alley in Louisiana because the rates are so high of cancer, and that is a majority Black community, and that's not a coincidence. So racism and immigrant justice, rights for immigrants, all of these things intertwine. A huge reason for why people are migrating from their homes and why refugees are only going to increase and increase as the climate crisis gets worse is as more and more places in the world become uninhabitable, there's going to be more and more refugees, more and more immigrants. And so migration is going to become something very common on this earth, more so than it is now. And if we don't get rid of our anti-immigrant sentiments, if we get so obsessed with borders and so obsessed with treating the others like they're less than human and other and us versus them, then we're not going to make it okay through this new climate disastered world that we're unfortunately going to have to live in.
One of the things I've been working on is really emphasizing that climate justice is a migrant justice issue, and that a part of climate solutions is the right to migrate.
Absolutely.
And we're at time, but one last question. So what is your advice for people who want to get involved in climate? Because we know you don't have to be working at a nonprofit to be doing this work. You and I were also talking backstage. We're artists. We do this also from a perspective as artists. Can you talk a little bit about how folks can get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a filmmaker. My first love is animation, writing and directing and producing for animation. Thanu's a DJ. So we also love art. There's also ways to get involved through your careers, whether it be you're in the medical field, in the artistic field, in the political, in the whatever it is. Climate change is happening on the earth, which means if you live on earth and are in an industry that is on the earth, it somehow will intersect and impact you. So wherever you are, if you breathe air, eat food, rely on not being killed in a natural disaster, then you can make change in your workplace or in your industry. I think people often think of activism as like, if you're not in the streets with a megaphone yelling down with the system, then that's the only way to do it. But there's so many other ways to take action. Through my art and filmmaking, I want to produce stories using fiction and animation to make people care about climate, the crisis in new ways. Thanu, I can let you speak on your art and your goals for it, but take action via joining collectives, via joining community. Do individual work, sure, but again, remember, it's systemic change, so the more that we can work in community. If you want to join an organization, you can go to thisiszerohour.org to join the 0 Hour movement. That's a place to get involved, but just make sure to do what you can within your communities, circles, workplaces, because we all are in a climate emergency, and everyone should be working like it's emergency mode. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I also work for 350.org. You can also join a local group through 350.org. And just to wrap up, that for me, I do climate work because I believe in all of our right to joy. And that's why I'm an artist. And so just to say that like so much of like doing any of this activism should also be rooted in joy. To end on a hopeful note, if you are a New Yorker, if you voted in these elections, one of the proposals that actually passed was $2.1 billion for New York City to implement climate adaptation, which is a huge deal. So we need to be working on that level. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much. Muchas gracias.